The story begins shortly after Fives' death in the Coruscant lower levels. Rex and Anakin both stood in silence. Anakin's arms were crossed, a disturbed look on his face. Rex was observing Anakin, hoping for orders. For Anakin to tell him what now, how to proceed, but none came. Anakin just didn't know how to feel about all of this. But Anakin had started to trust more in the Force in the last couple of months. He closed his eyes. He was silent for a long time, but it was almost like the Force was whispering to him. And when he opened his eyes, he knew how they had to proceed. They needed to reflect, think, and act, not just shake it off. They couldn't just ignore what Fives told them. Sure, Fives might just went crazy, but both Anakin and Rex knew that they cannot continue fighting in this war without at least attempting to dig a little further into this mystery. So he spoke, hypothetically. If they were to secretly investigate this, how would they approach it? Only hypothetically, sir? Yes, only hypothetically, Rex. Rex spoke, saying that there isn't a clear path to understanding this. They could try getting some information out of big data sets on Tipoca City that detailed the entire process of creating the clone army. So Anakin asked if, hypothetically, he could give his complete trust to the 501st Legion to investigate this matter and not report it to anyone. Rex said that the 501st are probably the most independent and open-minded clones out there. If anyone can be trusted with a mission like that, hypothetically, it would be them. So Anakin and Rex started setting rough guidelines. The nature of the mission was secretive. The more people that know about it, the worse their chances of discovering anything are. So at the start, Rex didn't tell many clones, only clones he knew extremely well, not clones high in command. He needed clones that had some free time, so to speak, not constantly on duty. If these clones were to be captured, the consequences would be smaller than if somebody high in command were captured. That could affect the entire 501st Battalion. So through the next month, as the clones of the 501st cycled through Kamino, they made an effort to examine anything and everything that might give them some clues about the inhibitor chips. They searched their own data logs on Kamino and even carefully tried to get some information out of Kaminoans. When Kaminoans asked why they were asking these questions, they just brushed it off as curiosity. Not a good thing for a clone, but it was understood after what happened to Fives. But in the end, this didn't really lead anywhere. So they proceeded to the next step, to illegal stuff. They started by casually glancing at datapads belonging to Kaminoans and continued to more serious crimes that could even get them terminated, but nothing. So Rex and Anakin decided it was time for an organized operation. So Jesse, Dogma, Apo, and Kix were given a secretive mission by Rex. Sneak into the Tipoca City dataset room and try extracting data about the chips, just as Fives tried. So the plan got into action. Jesse, Dogma, Apo, and Kix sneaked into the main data center on Tipoca City. They worked quickly. They knew that this kind of security breach would almost surely trigger some alarms, but they didn't linger. They started by checking some basic info in the data center. It was better than everything else they had scraped together so far, but definitely not good enough. So they got to the ugly part. They started decrypting the secured data. They were prepared. Throughout the last month, they had been trained in decryption. Plus, they were clones. They knew how Kaminoan tech worked. So they did indeed break into the entire library. All the gems never given to them about their brothers, their creation, everything was in front of them. Private data about every clone, Django's DNA sequence, everything. But incredibly, something was still missing. Anything at all about the inhibitor chips. They could piece together that the chips apparently contained some kind of contingency orders, but not much at all. The clones were seriously panicking now. They were running out of time, but they decided getting back empty-handed is worse than getting captured, even if that means death. So, only one of them, Kix, started to evacuate with his very limited information to report. The other clones stayed behind, trying to find additional information about the implants. But as they continued, the doors burst open from all sides. They lifted their hands. Jesse looked at Apo and made one last ironic comment. They needed longer than I expected. A couple of hours later, Rex was staring at his newest report. Jesse, Apo, and Dogma were captured stealing the encrypted data and sentenced to immediate termination. Rex couldn't move. That was a hard hit for him. The most elite soldiers of the 501st, brothers he'd known from birth, were just gone, except one from the group, Kix. He climbed into the exhaust port and managed to escape from one of the small hangars of the vast Tapoca city, but unfortunately, he didn't have much to report anyway. He was able to secretly contact Rex and tell him what he knew. However, he couldn't return to the war. He was supposed to be on Camino. It would look suspicious. He couldn't go back to Camino either. The captured clones might be forced to disclose information, including that he was also part of the group. He just hoped that the clones wouldn't tell too much. The Kaminoans would probably see it as some kind of rebellious movement anyway. If anyone would die rather than compromise the mission, it's those clones. It was still definitely not good news for the 501st. Not only because they lost 3 great men, but because these were clones in very high positions. The 501st would definitely look suspicious to the Kaminoans from now on. The whole battalion was in danger. Anakin was extremely sad about the loss of his soldiers, his friends, but most of all, he was frustrated. It had been over 3 standard months since they started the secretive operation. They hadn't discovered anything at all yet. It was obvious that the chip conspiracy ran deeper than any of them would have foreseen. And also, if inhibitor chips really could make clones execute the Jedi, then they needed to find out everything they could as fast as possible. It was urgent, so Rex proposed an ugly idea, one they both knew was necessary. Anakin just didn't want to ask it from the clones, but now, the mission was costing lives already anyway. Somebody had to volunteer to remove their chip, and that person was Rex. He immediately said he had been thinking about it a lot. It had to be him. Anakin asked him to ask somebody else. He's the captain, but Rex was determined. So now they needed a medical droid. They could attempt the procedure right there and then on the Star Destroyer. But Anakin said that if they were doing this, let's at least do it right. So Anakin said he would find somebody or something, a droid, a facility, something that would be able to uncover all the secrets of the removed chip. Sadly, Anakin didn't exactly know a lot of medical droids. He could just get a random shady medical droid in the Coruscant lower levels, but how is that any better than doing it on the Venator anyway? So Anakin accepted the ugly truth. He had to expand the operation. He needed somebody with connections, a middle-aged, funny, friendly man. Obi-Wan. He needed Obi-Wan. So Anakin talked to Obi-Wan. He knew the more people he told about the mission, the worse it could get, but he trusted Obi-Wan fully. He might not be willing to help them, but at least he wouldn't tell anyone else. So Anakin told Obi-Wan everything. Their failed attempts to extract any information, the suspicious lack of data, and their current plan. Obi-Wan said he could not help. Anakin was dealing with some seriously shady business. Obi-Wan was almost disappointed, but he understood what Anakin was trying to do. So Anakin was left alone. At least until a few days later, when Obi-Wan approached him, annoyed, and just told him to follow him. Anakin got a sudden smirk on his face, as he immediately knew Obi-Wan was willing to help after some consideration, as always. So Obi-Wan and Anakin went to Dex's cantina. As they sat down with Dex, Obi-Wan explained the entire situation to him. Anakin wasn't happy with how much information Obi-Wan was revealing, but Obi-Wan looked at him and just said, "It's fine. He and I go way back. Besides, he's not a rat." Dex thought for a while before saying he knew only one guy who he was completely sure would not ask any questions at all. A guy on Ord Mantell. He owned a small clinical center. It was entirely his property. Not too big, but not too small to perform some serious advanced procedures. So Dex contacted Kale Varnus, informing him that some Jedi and clones were flying to Ord Mantell to meet him. As Rex, Anakin, Obi-Wan, and a few other clones arrived with their small shuttle, they were greeted by 2 Rhodians who escorted them inside. The medical center looked more like a cantina than anything serious. It didn't look exactly sterile. Anakin wondered if all of this was worth it. They could just do all of this on the Venator anyway. Then they met Kale Varnus. He was a middle-aged human male. He greeted the Jedi, saying Dex never disappoints him with his exotic clients. Obi-Wan informed the man that the operation before them was one of great importance. They needed top-notch medical care. Kale just laughed before saying that for the right price, they'd get the best medical service in the galaxy. Obi-Wan handed him a few thousand credits, and they proceeded to a cleaner part of the complex, to one of the top-tier operating rooms of the medical center. It was immediately obvious that these people dealt with all kinds of crazy injuries. Dex definitely knew what he was doing. doing. Once again, he didn't disappoint. Not just classical surgical equipment, but regeneration pods, giant synthetic applicators, scanners, colto tanks for some reason, and even stasis fields for precise operations. So Anakin asked Rex one final time if he was sure he wanted to do this. Rex just nodded in agreement. So Rex sat down. He was given drugs, just enough to knock him out for a while, and the operation started. Surprisingly to Anakin and Obi-Wan, it lasted just a few very short minutes. Apparently, the inhibitor chip was completely outside the brain, barely touching it. It was connected to the brain by some synapses that had to be cut though. Kale investigated the chip. He started with simple physical inspection, continued with microscopic analysis, and even tried some radiation exposure. Finally, he rendered a small piece of organic tissue that allowed him to connect the chip to the data port of one of the many medical droids present. From there, he was able to extract everything. Every single one of the 150 contingency orders, including Order 66. Anakin and Obi-Wan were shocked, and so was Kale. He just said that he didn't want to have any problems. Obi-Wan assured him that he wouldn't, as he passed him an additional 3,000 credits. When Rex finally awoke, he was tied to a table by stasis fields, just in case. But it was quickly confirmed that he was in perfect condition, aside from the removal of the chip. The Jedi didn't know what to think of Order 66. There were many strange orders on the list. Perhaps it was just the Kaminoans being extremely paranoid. There were other weird orders too, like one for terminating civilians, or even the Chancellor himself. But this was still very alarming. Palpatine definitely knew at least something about these orders. He would have brought it up, unless he was plotting against them, against the Republic. Who knows? The other 3 clones that came with Rex and the Jedi also volunteered to get their chips removed. Kale studied every single one of them, and they all showed the same results. The same crazy orders. He also pieced together the meaning of many strange mechanical parts of the chips. He concluded that the chips were definitely able to override the clones' critical thinking to some extent, although it was hard to say if they'd actually execute all the orders on the list. So the Jedi and clones left, and Kale was confused and shaken. On the Star Destroyer, the Jedi immediately contacted the High Council and arranged an immediate meeting. In the meeting, Obi-Wan presented the evidence. The Council was not happy about Anakin's little mission, but as always, Obi-Wan just blamed it on the Force. Anakin was simply following his instincts. Anakin expected the Jedi to agree that this made no sense. None of it. But surprisingly, Windu and Yoda didn't look shocked at all. They both just kept staring at the floor. Until Windu spoke, saying this was the final piece of the puzzle to conclude the mystery. The Chancellor was definitely not the honest man he presented himself as. From there, Windu just listed the suspicious list of things that made the Chancellor look extremely guilty of treason. More and more emergency powers given to him. The war wrapping up in such a strange way. His unique connection to Anakin. His weird, elusive feeling in the Force. Everything Five said. It was all too much. Sure, none of this information completely exposed him, but there was just too much to be a complete coincidence. Anakin was surprised. He saw it now. For the first time in a long time, he felt like the Council actually responded better to something than he did. So Windu, without hesitation, just said that they have to remove Palpatine from office, now, no matter what. So Windu, Yoda, and a bunch of other Council members made an emergency appointment to meet with the Chancellor. Meanwhile, the 501st and 212th got to work. Obi-Wan and Anakin issued an immediate order for all clones to remove their inhibitor chips, immediately. Many clones were confused, but did indeed obey. The very limited medical bays of the Venator-class Star Destroyers would be extremely busy for the next couple of hours. Meanwhile, the Jedi got into the Chancellor's office. Palpatine politely, immediately mentioned that it was extremely late, but Windu assured him they would be brief. So, they sat down next to the Chancellor. Windu broke the silence with a hard statement. Chancellor, the Jedi Council strongly agrees that you should return the emergency powers immediately. Palpatine's face went blank for a second before just asking, "Why is that, Master Jedi?" "Because, Chancellor, we have evidence of your deception." Palpatine's face was cold and distant. What evidence? The 501st Battalion discovered. Windu suddenly felt something pressing against his neck. Without the Jedi even realizing it, the Coruscant Guard had made their way to the Chancellor's office and declared that the Jedi were under arrest. Palpatine spoke, saying that he suspected the Jedi were part of the treasonous attack on Tipoca City. "They are all under arrest." In that moment, the Jedi ignited their sabers and cut through the the clones' blasters, Palpatine suddenly jumped out of the window into Coruscant's night, as the Jedi were preoccupied with the Coruscant Guard. Suddenly, in the blink of an eye, 2 LAATs crashed into the office with immense speed, crushing Kolar and Fisto immediately. Windu looked at Yoda as the explosives inside the LAATs went off, killing all the Jedi in the building instantly. The explosion was massive, shaking 500 Republica's Durasteel foundations. The Jedi Council was gone. Windu, Yoda, Fisto, Plo, everybody. As Star Destroyers were navigating through the hyperspace route of the Hydean Way, Anakin suddenly felt this disturbance. So the clones doubled their efforts. Every clone had to have their inhibitor chip removed before they reached the capital. 2 standard hours later, Palpatine was sitting inside his Senate podium. He was exhausted, but there were more speeches to be given. He already checked many from his list. He told the Senate that the explosion left him scarred and deformed, that the Jedi were traitors. Everything left after the break was to announce the creation of the Galactic Empire. Suddenly, Palpatine felt a small vibration, and then he heard the rumble. What was that? He asked the royal guards to check it out. A few seconds later, they flew back from the hallway as a thermal detonator exploded in their faces. Palpatine stood up, igniting his saber. Through the narrow hallways appeared Anakin and Obi-Wan. Palpatine was mad. Not now. Not here. How did they survive anyway? The temple was in ruins, and he executed Order 66. Unknown to Palpatine, the 501st and 212th battalions were free of his brainwashing. Suddenly, clones rushed from all sides, with Z6 blaster cannons. Palpatine leapt from his seat as they opened fire, but there was not much he could do other than spin around dodging their attacks. So, Palpatine leapt back to the Senate podium as it lifted toward the Senate chamber. The senators looked in shock as a figure dressed in the Chancellor's robes with a red saber in his hand appeared. The 501st and 212th fired at him from all sides. Palpatine extinguished his saber and blasted lightning into clones and senators. Chaos erupted as Anakin and Obi-Wan jumped to the Senate podium. Sabers ignited as Palpatine jumped high up to one of the Senate pods above, ran through the doors, blasted force energy into the Durasteel windows as they shattered, and he leapt into Coruscant's night yet again. Obi-Wan tried chasing him down, but he quickly figured it was for nothing. He was just too fast. Anakin stood in the middle of the Senate chamber, the hero of the war. In the following months, the Galactic Republic underwent swift reforms, aiming to return the system back to democracy. Order 66 was disabled. The clone army stood strong, although with immense guilt for what they had done to their generals. Surprisingly to everybody, the CIS Senate stood stronger and more united than ever before under the leadership of Count Dooku. The war wasn't easy, especially with the loss of the entire Jedi Order. Anakin and Obi-Wan started a new order, away from the depressing empty temple on Coruscant. Many threats in the galaxy flourished, besides the Separatists, like Maul. With the loss of Palpatine, the Separatists were fractured, but Dooku still managed to hold them together, and they remained a big threat. The future of the galaxy was uncertain, especially with Sidious still alive somewhere, but at least he wasn't the Senate anymore.